So I'm going to tell you about managing our 13 nature reserves in the Dales, not just around the Ingleborough area. I'm going to concentrate on those to start with. So we have, just those of you who can't sort of see the map too clearly there, I'm just putting the pointer on the summit of Ingleborough, and then the sort of northern end of the ridge at Park Fell is there. And the red outlined areas are nature reserves that we own in the Ingleborough area. So we have Southern Scales over here. I'm going to tell you a bit more about these in a minute. We have Salt Lake Quarry right next to the railway. We have Ashes Pasture, it's a stunning place, and South House Pavement down in the south, and then Bray Pasture about a mile out of Horton and Ribblesale. And what's kind of important about that map isn't just that we own 5 nature reserves there, it's that 2 of those are within the National Nature Reserve, which is obviously managed by Natural England, but also Bray Pasture is just on the boundary. Salt Lake Quarry is just a couple hundred metres away, and Ashes Pasture 300 metres away. And we are hopeful in the next few months or years that those are going to become part of the National Nature Reserve. And a lot of this area in here is the National Nature Reserve. And 10 years ago, a big review was done on England's wildlife sites, a guy called Sir John Lawton. And one of the things he said about the weaknesses of our wildlife, sort of protected wildlife site system, is that they needed more of them, they needed to be bigger, they needed to be better, and needed to be more joined up. And we're trying to do that in the Ingleborough area. And there's some sort of exciting news I can't tell you much about at the end, but I'll tell you what I can. And we are hoping to improve the situation in terms of wildlife conservation around that area. Right, so yeah, coming back to the 5 Ingleborough sites, these have also just come out of having a lot of funding through the Stories in Stone project. Some of you will know about the Stories in Stone project. This was run by the Yorkshire Dales Millennium Trust, so I've been working very closely with them over the last 4 or 5 years, well, 4 years since I arrived. This was a big £2.6 million lottery funded project. And the Yorkshire Wildlife Trust were merely one of the organisations who were beneficiaries to this. And the work that was done of this project has really set us up for where we are now. So we got about £137,000 of that funding, and that paid for helping our trainees to get training, paid for a new tool store, paid for new access into sites, new interpretation boards, a new woodland, lots and lots of dry stone walling, because that's a constant issue on our sites, particularly around Ingleborough, is keeping on top of the dry stone walls, keeping them in good repair. And that's been an enormous help. And there's been I could talk for hours about the Stories in Stone project. As an outsider, when I first came looking in, the range of projects that have been delivered by that have been stunning. A lot of good archaeological work, a lot of good work with school children, all sorts of stuff. And I know Karen Cowley, who's listening, could tell a lot more about that. But the good thing is lots of organisations benefited from that, and it's led to a sort of a springboard to them moving on and doing things. When I started Yorkshire Wildlife Trust, there were no Yorkshire Wildlife Trust staff nearby. And it's been nice. I live down in Ingleton, so it's very handy for me. And it's been nice to sort of develop these sites thanks to quite a bit of investment in them. Okay, let's just move that on. So yeah, I'm going to talk first of all about Ashes Pasture. This reserve was quite a small reserve. I'm just outlining what was the boundary until 5 years ago. We just owned this little valley woodland, and this pasture here. This is the main, you're about a mile from Ribblehead here. This is the main Carlisle Railway here. And Salt Lake Quarry, which we'll talk about a bit, is here. And then 5 years ago, we got news that the farmer who owned the land was wanting to sell the land. And basically, the bit he was wanting to sell us was all these hay meadows down here, which are exceptional. We've lost 97% of our hay meadows in this country. And to actually have, particularly these areas here, to have those hay meadows in almost perfect condition when you buy a site is just fantastic. And it's testament to a very good management, a traditional farmed management of that site. We also acquired a big drumlin. There's lots of drumlins, those big glacial mounds, for those who don't know what they are, that you get up in this area. And we've also got a section of the River Ribble down here as well. And I'll tell you more about what the sort of plans are for the river and what's next to that as well. So this was up for sale at £175,000. Now we're quite a big charity, but £175,000 is a huge amount of money for us to suddenly find. But luckily the Esme Fairbairn Foundation stepped in and basically gave us a very low interest loan to pay for that. So we were able to complete that purchase, and then we had to find the money to pay for it over the next 2 years. And we had it caught people's imagination. I think there's something about hay meadows that really catches people's imagination. And we had an appeal, a public appeal. It got in the Daily Telegraph. We had a private donor from London ring up, having seen the Telegraph, and give us £20,000 just like that. We had another donor gave us £3,000, and then 30 seconds later gave us another £3,000 on Just Giving. And my manager, who was fundraising manager at the time, rang him up and said, "Sorry, is this a mistake?" And he went, "Yeah, it is, but never mind, you can have it." And isn't that nice that somebody can spare £3,000? But that was fantastic. We also got a lot of money through foundations and charitable trusts, and another £60,000 through the Heritage Lottery Fund as well. And that has meant we've been able to buy that land, but not just buy it, also improve the management and improve the access and improve the interpretation of that site. So I've said about the meadows. We got a big grant to restore Rain Barn here with, again, grant from the Yorkshire Dales Millennium Trust, £23,000 grant. The roof was in a state of collapse. It wasn't weatherproof. The inside timber work was awful. The walls were in a poor state. And we got a local building contractor in, and they've done a fantastic job restoring a traditional field barn, such a feature of the Yorkshire landscape. But it's being used as well. The good thing is the farmer who sold us the land still grazes the land on our behalf. And when it's being grazed in the autumn and winter, then he puts feed in there for when it gets particularly cold. It's also being used by barn owls and by kestrels. We have a barn owl nest box and a kestrel nest box in there. And the barn owl nest box was successful last year. And they haven't nested in there this year, but they are still using the barn. There's a lot of pellets about. The meadows, I've already talked briefly about the meadows. The view back the other way is probably better. There's some quite common stuff here, like obviously meadow sweet and knapweed. But the view the other way looks straight down to Pennygent. You'll all know Pennygent. And in the front of the picture, we've obviously got ragged robin, we've got common bistort, we've got lots and lots of buttercups. This meadow has got lots of orchids. It's an incredibly diverse meadow. It's spectacular. There's no two ways about it. It's just a perfect example of what a Yorkshire hay meadow should be. And it also has a phenomenal number of globeflowers. I used to look after a reserve for Lancashire Wildlife Trust, quite a small reserve, and it had a single globeflower plant, and we were desperately trying to protect that plant. Here, so I was injured a couple of weeks ago. I had a bad leg. So there was a group drive some morning. I just thought I'd go and try and estimate how many globeflower flowers there are. And just by a bit of maths, not very good maths, I reckon there were about 100,000 globeflower flowers on that site at the moment. So a phenomenal number of globeflowers, and we're not quite sure why. We know why they're there. It's traditional management of the site. It's a wetter area. The soils are right for it. They seem to like the weather we get, which can be quite vicious in the Dales, particularly that part of the Dales. It could be a wet site. But it's just an absolute treat to see that every year. It's just a fantastic thing to actually witness. Elsewhere on the reserve, we have things that are quite useful to help plants, wildflowers to get established. So the plant on the left there is lousewort, which is one of these semi-parasitic plants. So it suppresses the growth of the grasses around it, which means that wildflowers have a better chance of getting established. We also have on the right, we have common bistort, which has another name of pudding dock, and traditionally in parts of the Pennines, like down near Hebden Bridge and places like that, they used to use it at Easter to make the leaves. They used to make almost like a savoury quiche. And I'm ashamed to say I've never tried it, but they have competitions to see who can bake the best one, and it's something I really should try one year. But again, it's not all that common. You do see it on quite a lot of the road verges around here, and this is all these plants are here because of the way it's been managed over decades and decades. It basically has had no artificial fertilizers chucked on it. It might have a little bit of well-rotted farmyard manure every couple of years put on, and it's cut every July, as is tradition in this part of the Dales, for hay, and then it's grazed a few weeks later with cattle and sheep. And it's just, yeah, if you get a chance, it's a fantastic site. But it's not just the meadows that are superb here as well. This is actually within the tree planting area. Nothing unusual there, just betony and meadow sweet, but just in such great numbers. It really is an absolute joy to see. And very soon after I started, we went in and the meadow sweet was all in seed by September 4 years ago. And we disturbed a flock of somewhere in the region of 300 or 400 goldfinches. So they're using this to feed on as well. So it's a really good, almost like a motorway services for birds, because there's so many things in seed there at that time of year. So they can just stop off on the way, sort of when they're traveling around. And it's a really good sort of feeding station. Thank you, Karen, you're in this photo, so you can see yourself at the back there. So one of the things we've really missed because of COVID, I'll talk a bit more about COVID later, is the ability to go out and do guided walks on site. So we will reintroduce these. So hopefully next summer, and obviously I'll publicise these quite widely, but you'd be welcome to come on these. And if you can go with an expert, I co-led this one, but I'm sort of an expert on conservation management. I'm not an expert botanist, but Colin there in the middle showing us I think there were orchids in this place. Colin is the now retired manager of Leyburn National Nature Reserve and has a phenomenal depth of knowledge. And if you go around one of these sites with somebody like that, you can't help but be enthusiastic about it. It's just a stunning place to learn about plants. So he has things like a list of 10 things you don't know about globe flowers, which I think I didn't know 9 of them. So just shows his depth of knowledge. But yeah, it's been really nice. You know, obviously it's been a big miss this year, not being able to get out on site as much as we would have done. We are doing practical works on site. We just haven't done much public engagement work. So this is on the top pasture as well. I mentioned the fact there were hay meadows at the bottom of the hill. This bank to the left slopes down quite steeply, and it's different character, again, completely different character. If you go up there at the moment, the plant on the left is called a heath spotted orchid, and there are many, many hundreds of those now just coming into flower. Again, that's because of the way the site has been managed. It's kept those orchids there. I'll tell you a bit more about that in a second. On the right is greater butterfly orchid. Not many of those, very, very few of those on site, but nice when you do stumble across them. He's spotted though, you can't really miss them. You just walk down from the entrance about 50 yards and they're all over the place. So yeah, it's probably the best time of year to see the heath spotted orchids at the moment. One of the stars of the show, although it's a very small star, is the small white orchid. They are in flower at the moment, or they were last week. They are very difficult to find unless you know where you're looking. Last year, we only had one in flower. Last year was a strange year for a lot of plants because we had an early drought. This year has been slightly better, so there were at least, I've seen a couple in flower, somebody else said there's 5 in flower. And they're only tiny things. Those are only sort of 5 or 6 inches high. So, you know, they are very, very tricky to spot. But the reason they're there is because of the way that it's been managed again. And it's managed by cattle grazing and a bit of sheep grazing, but largely cattle grazing, which gives you sort of, cattle tend to graze in a more sort of varied way. So they leave some bare ground, they leave some longer patches. Small white orchid likes to be in short grassland. So it needs areas that have been sort of cut back quite a lot. But yeah, that's helps there. And then there's another part of the site there. We actually I'll tell you a bit more about the other part in a minute. So I've just forgotten about this slide. So this is looking down that bank. The small white orchid is on the sort of slope in the background, and then you're looking across the rain barn we saw before. This is just after the hay cut has been done. And one of these strange little beauties of this site is that it's because of the ground conditions. We have swallow holes down there. We have various bits of undulating ground. We have various bits of marshy ground. We can't cut the entire hay meadow. So it means that you've got some areas that are kept long and quite rank, which become really good refuges for amphibians, plant and birds, things like that, and insects particularly. But it means that, you know, you get a hay cut off. If the weather allows, it's sometimes quite tricky, but it means that areas are different on the site. It's not all the same sort of characteristic habitats, if you like. I was saying about management for the heath spotted orchids. This is just up near the Gill Woodlands. This is some of our volunteers. Basically, we get a big pedestrian mowing every year. We can't use a tractor there. It's too sensitive. The ground is too soft and there's too many rocky bits that it would struggle with. And we do the pedestrian mowing of the site. We run the mower all day, and then we spend about 2 full days with 8 to 9 people raking all the thatch off. A lot of it is, as you can see, is juncus. And we take as much of that away from the site and to the edges as we can, because we don't want it to be too nutrient rich. The heath spotted orchid like it to be reasonably nutrient poor, and certainly not to be swamped by other vegetation around it as well. So that's a big annual job we do at the site that we do with our volunteers. We've also done a huge amount of dry stone walling at this site. The vast majority of the stuff on the left has been done by a local contractor, a very good local contractor. And this was mostly paid for through the Stories in Stone project. We restored about 1 kilometre of wall at this site, and that's now all in fantastic condition. And then we do a lot of the other, we've done about 100 metres with our volunteers. That's probably up to about 150 now, because we've had a good few task days there in the last few weeks. And we're just trying to keep it. The reason we're restoring it, 2 reasons. Landscape character, it's really important part of the Dales landscape, but also it's to control the grazing on the site. We don't want the hay meadow, for example, having sheep and cattle on in the middle of June, July when it's at its best. So we need to make sure all the boundaries are stop proof. And we've done this a lot with our volunteers. You can see at the bottom there. I'm ashamed to say some of those volunteers are now better than me at walling, which really hurts. But they are fantastic. They've learned the skill so quickly, and it's really nice to see them enjoying that and getting stuck in. So yeah, that's an ongoing job. It will be for years to come. Talked about the barn. This is just to show the quality of workmanship inside the barn. This was done by a building contractor from just down in Horton in Ribblesdale. Really high quality job. And then we've been up and we've put the barn owl nest box in the kestrel nest box. I must admit, I didn't know that you could put both those nest boxes in the same barn, and they can both be used. They will tolerate each other. My boss is a very mad keen bird watcher, and he knows a lot about it. He said, yeah, it's absolutely fine. So yeah, that's nice. And it's just another little feature of the reserve. We've also seen short-eared owls up there and little owls as well. So it's quite a good spot for owls if you get up there. As part of the lottery grant as well, we had to put a new entrance area in with an interpretation board. And the strange little lollipop-looking like thing is what's called a soundpost. And basically, it's lots of recorded messages about how we manage the site, about the Wildlife Trust, about how it was funded, the work. Also, lots of nice bird sounds. This is a fantastic site for cuckoos. You can stand. Last year, I stood there in the middle of it would be May, June time, and I could hear cuckoos in 6 different directions at the same time. There's a lot of them up at Colt Park as well, just up the track to the National Nature Reserve. So really, really good. And people come and play the bird sound when it's out of season and can sort of hear what it would sound like in the summer as well. And that's proved to be quite popular. This is literally just over the wall from the Three Peaks route as well, which we don't particularly want on the site, but we're quite happy if people come in and have a little rest and just, hopefully think about coming back there sometime in the future. I mentioned the fact we now are the proud owners of a 300-yard section of the River Ribble. This is basically typical of some rivers in the area that's been made into a straight, almost like a canal. It's been moved that way, engineered that way, if you like. And we've done, over the last 3 or 4 years, we've been working very closely with the Ribble Rivers Trust, again, another organisation we love to work in partnership with. They managed to secure a big wetland environment grant fund for it, and this has been to basically, so the problem with that river is it's got no trees, no shade, therefore it's too hot for the salmon and for the trout to come up this far. It's also not your traditional, in a river like this, you should have pools and riffles and bends and things like that. And the pools basically are sort of deeper water, and the riffles are the shallower gravelly water that the salmon and trout and oceans can spawn into. So the Ribble Rivers Trust, over 2 years ago, I think it was, and they put in 2 of these bunds. And these bunds they are designed to speed the water up. And what that then does, it scours out. It has a more erosive capacity. It scours out a pool, and then as it slows down again, it drops the gravel and cobbles that it scoured out, and you then end up with this pool and riffle sequence going downstream, which is what we need for the fish. It's not just about the fish, though. We are wanting to improve the situation in terms of the tree cover in the Dales. It's obviously a very low level of tree cover in many parts of the Dales. You can just see in the background here, there's a tree scheme which goes almost as far as Gearstones. And we are linking in with this, and the Ribble Rivers Trust have ambitions to go further downstream of us. And we've been involved in this winter. This is work this winter. I know Bruce will be cringing at this because of all those tubes. So yeah, I mean, I will talk a bit about tubes as we go through, but this is 1,600 trees that have gone in, planted with our volunteers. I like the design in terms of we've got quite a lot of alder and willow down by the river. We've left a vehicle track through for various reasons, but we've also got, we're trying to make it look as natural as possible. So no sort of straight lines, some dense clumps, some really wide open areas, some glades. And I think that's kind of key. Those of you who've seen the recent planting at Broughton Hall Estate near Skipton, don't get me wrong, the number of trees they've planted is absolutely commendable. What I don't like about those is they've been evenly spaced and they're in lines, and it just looks a little bit artificial. Absolutely, this looks artificial as well with all those tubes. It's been one of those things that's been bugging me for several years, is there a better way? And I think we're about to reach the point where there will be a better way, but I don't think we're quite there yet. Tubex, who manufacture these tubes, have just finally started a recycling scheme. The reasons we use these tubes is basically they help the trees get established. They give them a real good chance of getting away. I did schemes in lakes where we had about 97% success rate where we used tubes, and we had about 20% success rate where we didn't use tubes. The downside of these, of course, is if any of them wash away, they end up downstream and potentially end up in the sea, eventually. Some of the older types of tubes, especially the mesh ones, break down and shed bits of plastic, which is awful. These are okay. These tend to last about 9 or 10 years without doing that. However, you've still got to get them off site. And there are a lot of sites where they are not being taken off site. So we have sort of a plan to remove these, judging by tree planting I've done in the lakes. These tubes should be removed in about 8 years' time. So kind of watch this space on that. And we're doing that now from quite a few of our sites. Grasswood is a notable one where we've taken thousands of tubes off recently. And they're all down by the sort of bottom boundary wall now, ready for a skip to get those out, because they are a problem. There is some talk about compostable tubes coming in. We just have to wait and see on those, because that's a very hard thing to do. Have a tube that lasts 7 or 8 years and then is compostable. There are some just coming out which are made out of wool, sheep's wool, and there are others that are made out of a really dense cardboard. But recent tests on those by a guy I know in the Forest Commission, they were only lasting sort of 7 or 8 months down south. They're not good enough in the weather we would have up here. The sheep wool ones could be interesting, and we're going to trial some of those soon. So I'm sure Bruce will have a question on that as well, because I know you have a campaign about trying to get rid of these. And I know it's starting to happen. Woodland Trust are moving away from them now and going to plant about twice as many trees because of the losses they will have. I still think they might lose more than that, but it's a start. And I think we're starting to do that now on various projects. We're going to start bare planting and trying it out and see what happens. Okay, moving on to Bray Pasture. Bray Pasture is a reserve on about a mile out of Horton and Ribblesdale. Fantastic site for butterflies. This is northern brown argus on the left, which have a slightly weird coloration in this area. That's been confirmed by a butterfly expert to me, so it is a northern brown argus. But it's also a superb site for quite rare plants. So the plant on the right is called a common bistort. When I first went there 3 or 4 years ago, there were a handful of them. Last year, I don't know why, they seemed to absolutely love the drought we had, and there were hundreds and hundreds of them. So things that struggled, some orchids struggled last year, things like alpine bistort did really, really quite well last year. So Bray is a very nice site. It has a gill woodland planted in it. It's now about 5 or 6 years old. It was planted just before I started. These are getting to the stage now where another couple of years we'll be taking those tubes off. It's been planted with a sort of very typical mix of native trees like oak and rowans and blackthorn and hawthorn and hazel. Obviously, we're not planting ash at the moment because of ash dieback. I'll talk more about that later. And again, another interpretation board funded through the Stories in Stone project, which is good because it's another visitor access point for people into this site, and it gives people a better understanding of how we manage the site and how we pay for the work. This is just, I've kind of just thrown this in because I was talking about tubes. This is a scheme I planted in the Lake District on Colbeck Common. This was planted in 2009. Me and the volunteers planted it. There's about 4,500 trees in this. And you might notice that it's planted very densely. There's about 3 little gills, and it's planted very densely in those gills and thinning out as you go up the hill. This is a site that was fully tubed. All those tubes have now, I think all those tubes have been removed. So this was taken 3 years ago. So the tubes were removed here after 7 or 8 years, and we had very low loss rates. And we're hopeful. Having visited this just sort of 3 years ago, I need to go back this summer, but I'm quite hopeful that's developing into a natural looking woodland. And it's been, it has been a great success. One of the reasons it's been a great success is volunteers. Volunteers have been instrumental in doing all the aftercare work on these, going in, straightening the tubes, going in, redoing the stakes, replacing if necessary, replacing dead trees if necessary. And so many tree schemes don't have that aftercare, and it's just vital that you do that to get the success rate. So going back to Bray Pasture, yeah, again, walling is a big issue here. This was done by our neighbours, Natural England. They had a group in here and did a really cracking job. A group of young people came in and did that. We've also got the plant on the right. This is hay rattle, otherwise known, Monty Don, the gardener, TV gardener, calls it the meadow maker. Again, it's a classic semi-parasitic plant and it suppresses all the grasses around it. I've got some in the lawn here now. I'm doing a bit of a meadow experiment here. And it's an absolutely fantastic way of helping wildflower meadows get established. Bray pasture is about the only site I've been to where I think we have too much. It is dominating the hay meadows, but the farmer at the oak at the moment who grazes it for us and takes the hay off it is okay with that at the moment, but it might reach the point where we have to cut some of it before it seeds in future years. But at the moment, it's doing really well. So yeah, Bray is a nice meadow, but even better up on the limestone crags. It's fantastic for all sorts of orchids. And particularly for things like this next plant, which is common rock rose. Again, that's the food plant of the northern brown Argus butterfly, caterpillar. It's a really important plant in the whole butterfly life cycle, and there's good numbers of that up on this site as well. It's not all good though. Not all our site work is a success story. So this is another northern brown Argus, but this was at a quarry, Mealbank Quarry, just outside Ingleton. And it kind of is the one that got away, unfortunately. We were hoping to lease this off Craven District Council on a long lease, probably a 50-year lease. And because it has this butterfly on site, that's the main reason we wanted it. It's also geological triple SI, has a scheduled ancient monument as well on site, an old Hoffman kiln. Unfortunately, we couldn't agree with the grazier to change the grazing regime. And it was overgrazed from our point of view. And I'm biased, I'm a conservationist. From our point of view, it was overgrazed and it wasn't what we wanted. So hopefully in the future we can revisit that. But the reason I'm showing this slide is that I sent it to a local guy called Terry Whittaker, who's an expert on butterflies, and just said, can you confirm this is northern brown Argus? From the underside, it's not always that easy to spot these things. And he came back, yes, and I can confirm it's breeding because I don't know if you can see the pointer, but down the bottom right-hand corner, there's a little white dot. That's actually one of the eggs of the northern brown Argus butterfly. So they are still hanging on the site, but they aren't going to do well unless we can get the grazing sorted and change the grazing regime. But that's not going to happen for a few years. But we'll watch this space. Let's hopefully at some stage in the not too distant future. Sulphur scales, one of the other big reserves we have on Ingleborough, an unbelievably good site for the geology. The limestone pavement here is just phenomenal. One of the downsides we have at the moment on this and many other sites is all the ash are dying off because of ash dieback. I'll talk more about that relating to grasswood in a minute. But a very, very special site, arguably overgrazed. We are currently in negotiations with Natural England. They did a condition assessment like 18 months ago and said it was in very good condition. And it is for certain things like fungi, wax-cap fungi. However, we think it's overgrazed. It's grazed year round, which is quite unusual for conservation sites. National England have now told us they want the sheep taken off this site within 3 years. So we've just renegotiated our grazing agreement with the grazier there, and the numbers of sheep will drop down. And then we'll also have a gap from, I think, next year where we don't graze it at all. So probably April, May, June, which will allow some of the orchids to get better established as well. So yeah, changing management to sort of reflect what we would like to achieve there. Again, another new interpretation board funded by the Yorkshire Dales Millennium Trust. The donation post in the background is there because this is on the Sulphur scales is on the Three Peaks route. It doesn't make us a huge amount of money, but it does make us a few £100 a year, so it's worthwhile having it there. And this site is one that we have about 100,000 people a year going through on the Three Peaks route, but luckily we have a hard surface path because otherwise it would do a significant amount of damage. We get a bit of litter, and that's annoying, frustrating, but not as bad as some other parts of the route. And there you can see the limestone pavement on the right. And that's, yeah, very, very special if you get a chance to walk across that. It really is kind of almost unique. It's just, well, we're very lucky in Yorkshire to have so much of it. And we graze with, so we've grazed with traditional breeds. This year it was graded, these aren't, but this year it was grazed with belted Galloways for certain times of the year. I mentioned the fact it's a really important site for wax-cap fungi as well. So yeah, and that's becoming more and more common in the limestone grassland areas. The Dales is grazing with sort of hardy cattle that can tolerate being there most of the year round. So I've talked about our volunteers, but we also try and work with groups from other places as well. So this was organised with the Millennium Trust again. This is a group of church people from various European cities, but also a group of refugees and asylum seekers. And I tried to teach them dry stem walling, which was very difficult. Some of their English was exceptional. Some of them didn't speak much English at all. So there's a lot of hand gestures, and they actually did a cracking job. But I learned far more than they did that day. Some of their stories were absolutely heartrending. Some of the things you heard were absolutely sobering. So yeah, it was. I think it's really important we make these places relevant. They were sort of living in Blackburn and Darwin and places like that. And we have to make our nature reserves relevant to all sorts of groups. It's not just about locals, although of course locals are absolutely welcome. We have to make sure the next generation is engaged with the work we want to do in the Dales. And this was my own volunteer group completing the wall. Quite tricky stone that, but they've done a cracking job on it. And it's yeah, a constant problem. We'll always be walling. We'll never be stopping walling. And South House Pavement, this is a very small reserve just on the flanks of Ingleborough. It's about 800 yards long and about 50 yards wide. And it's basically a little limestone cliff, a bit of a sealed off area, which sealed off by a dry stone wall the other side. And we have no grazing on it. If ever you go up there, be very careful. It's very, very difficult ground underfoot. But the caterpillar on the left is one of the biggest caterpillars we have. It's an elephant hawk moth. That's about 7 centimetres long. And this is a site again where we don't do a great deal of management. This is one we are kind of leaving to its own devices. The only thing we really do is basically clear bracken and clear some of the rosebay willow herb each year. We don't do all the rosebay willow herb by any means because that elephant hawk moth caterpillar needs it as part of its life cycle. So yeah, not a lot we do on the site, but an absolutely beautiful spot. And this is some of the walling, the boundary wall at Bray Pasture. And these are two of my trainees. So Rowan there is now working for Derbyshire Wildlife Trust. She spent a year with us. And John, last I heard, was doing contract tree planting. We do try and give opportunities to young people. We have a traineeship. So I'm just about to recruit a new trainee. They work for us 3 days a week for a year and hopefully get a lot of experience on how we manage the sites and how we work with volunteers and how we interact with the public and things like that. So yeah, a big part of our work. And again, just worth mentioning the Yorkshire Dales Millennium Trust here because they financially supported trainees for the 4 years, the Stories and Stone project, and supported apprentices at other organisations as well. So yeah, quite often quite an expensive thing to do supporting trainees. That was very welcome and it paid for training and things like that. Salt Lake Quarry, this is up near the, just across the road from Ash's Pasture actually, a small but absolutely stunning site. I think it's a couple of hectares. An old quarry used for the ballast for the railway, exceptional for orchids on the site, lots and lots of bird's eye primrose as well. Quite a straightforward site. There's quite a lot of scrub in there. We want to keep that because there's not much scrubby trees and woodland in the site. We do have some rare orchids in there. We've a lot of frog orchids. On the left, we've got quite a few of those in there. They're quite hard to find. Like sort of green against green background is never easy. But you have to use your imagination a bit. The flower bits, when they're at about the right stage, they look like a frog jumping out of water, hence the name. We also have fragrant orchids as well. And it's really quite a special site for a small site. We have a lot of early purple orchids in there as well, and a few botanical rarities. Lots of tway blades, bottom left here. These are a type of orchid which, you know, on a shelter site, they can grow a couple of feet tall. And the middle picture there is moonwort, which we only found we had on site last year, but I think there are records historically. We have at least 10 or 12 of those plants around as well. Moonwort, I believe it gets its name because of the shape of the leaf. It's almost like a half moon or a crescent moon. And the early purple orchids, which are now just about past flowering on the sites as well. So yeah, really quite a special spot. And again, a lot of butterflies, orange tip, you'll all know, orange tip butterflies. Herb Paris, quite a rare plant, and kidney vetch as well. So yeah, really worth the site, a really nice site to visit. It was a very difficult site. We didn't used to publicise it, but then thanks to a grant, I'm feeling like a stuck record now, thanks to a grant from the Millennium Trust, we managed to put in a new stock-proof fence, new steps, which are quite steep. You have to be careful on them, a new interpretation board. And the site management of this site is actually very easy. It's sheep and volunteers. I shouldn't forget the volunteers. So these were our own Hebrideans. They come across for holiday every autumn. They graze it hard for about a month and then go back to a farm on the North York Moors where they come from, one of our farms we look after. We also get volunteers into a bit of scrub clearance as well. Just occasionally we come in with chainsaws and take a bit out, but we want to leave a lot of as much of the scrub as we can. The Hebrideans do a fantastic job. As of last year, we've got a new grazier who's only coming 4 miles, which is great. And she put some rare breed sheep on last year, and this year she's going to put Herdwicks on. Moving across out the Ingleborough sites now. So Newbiggin Pasture, this is a site on in Bishopdale, which basically goes pretty much from the road, pretty much all the way to the top of the hill. It's quite an unusual site. A phenomenal amount of walling to do at this site. It really is in a very poor condition. We have hay meadows at the bottom, again, hay rattle on the left. They're not great, but we are improving those, and we're just about to enter a new agri-environment scheme, so we're going to try and tweak the management because they are overgrazed. And again, tree planting and scrub planting. This is specifically to help things like black grouse. Incidentally, we have had black grouse on Ash's pasture, which I didn't mention. We've had a black grouse on Ash's pasture this year in amongst the trees that have just been planted, so that's quite good. However, these are one tube I would never use again. They're square, they catch the wind, so they end up at a 45-degree angle. And when you need to put the stakes in tight, you've got to lift the tube off. As soon as you knock the stake in and it burrs, the top burrs, you can't get the tube back on. So just never use those tubes. That's a definite no-no from me. Again, I won't use those. We just got some from a colleague and free. So, but no, I'm not going to use them again. Cedar Quarry, again, another fantastic site. This is one we cut. We don't graze it because we have issues getting water onto the site. So we do an annual cut of this in about September or October. Again, really nice site for butterflies, insects. It's again a bit of a challenge because a lot of wall around the site, but it's good condition at the moment. We have a few rarities on the site. The plant on the right is called fairy foxglove, more than likely introduced according to a very good local botanist. But it's nice to see. It's all over the sort of the cliff faces there. And then you've got the I was saying about the butterflies. It's nothing unusual in terms of the butterflies, like just tortoiseshell and red admiral and things. But it's a phenomenal site in terms of numbers. You get there on the right day, there's so much knapweed in flower, amongst other things, that it's just full of butterflies. There's almost clouds of them. So again, worth a visit. Near to Aysgarth. It's just on the road between Aysgarth and Thornton Rust. It takes a bit of finding, but it's on a public footpath. And if you want to know where it is, just give me a shout. And then this is our smallest reserve. This is a place on the road between sort of Malham Tarn and Stainforth, really, Settle. It's a tiny reserve. It's a corner of a field that was walled off because it probably was so wet. It was probably causing farm problems as livestock getting stuck. It's only a tiny site. Probably it's certainly our smallest nature reserve. It's probably 40 yards, a triangle like 40 yards along each edge, maybe not even that. But it's a fantastic site. In terms of management, we clear rosebay willow herb. We clear some of the, occasionally we clear some of the things like some of the nettles, but we're not clearing totally. Again, we're just keeping it under control. And we have to keep the boundary stop proof. And this is quite a hard wall. This is not very clear from the picture, but this is big stone, really heavy limestone. And we are so lucky that we have a very good relationship with the Otley branch of the Dry Stone Walling Association. And they've done the repair here, done a fantastic job, but they also do a phenomenal amount of work for us at Grasswood. And they really keep the boundaries in excellent condition. And Grasswood, which I'm coming on to, is a really tricky site in terms of the amount of walls and just the sheer scale of the walls as well. So yeah, Grasswood, probably our flagship reserve, or in my area, certainly our flagship reserve. 78 hectares, big site. Was planted with a lot of coniferous plants that have been basically thinned out over the last 30 or 40 years. Not without its problems though now. We have a massive issue with ash dieback, and I'll tell you a bit more about that. The ash are largely dying at this wood, which is it's extremely sad, but there are some good things come out of it as well. So yeah, really, really fantastic site, just north of Grassington. I'm sure all of you know it, but if not, I thoroughly recommend going and having a look. So the dieback is hit hard really 6 or 7 years ago here. We are losing certainly more than 95% of our ash trees in Grasswood, probably higher, probably nearer 98, 99%. We get various signs and symptoms of ash dieback. You get this growth coming out of the trunk because it can't, basically it's a fungal infection. It stops the tree moving liquids up and down the tree. And basically its last response before it dies is to chuck out loads of this side growth, which is called epicormic growth. But it's basically its death throes. Unfortunately, that means it's on its way out. The top picture on the right is the ash dieback, what happens to the canopy. And on the bottom, the leaf is just suffering from the dieback. It's got the fungal spores that got into it and then spread into the tree that way. Desperately sad disease. Obviously, it's killing a lot of our ash trees in the Dales landscape. A lot of the boundary trees you see in the Dales are ash. and it's just such a shame. There is a hope that there are some with genetic resistance. So, for example, we've got Q Millennium Seed Bank coming up to collect seed in the autumn to see if they can find out if we have got any genetic resistance, but I have to say there's no signs of that at all at the moment. So yeah, it's been really sad. We've got a felling license to clear. We're only felling where there are public safety issues. So we're felling within falling distance of the road, the main track, the public footpath, and a couple of the other main desire line paths. But I have to say, it's been one of those things that the public seem to know about. We've not had a single, we are felling hundreds and hundreds of trees, and we've not had a single complaint. People are obviously sad, but they understand what's happening. The reason we're felling them is they become very brittle and very dangerous within 2 or 3 years of dying. We've had some interesting trees coming down. I've had very experienced chainsaw contractors worried about how they're dealing with some of the trees. But we've done a lot of the work ourselves, the contractors, the roadside ones and the bigger trees. And then our volunteers have been involved in clearing the rest. So these are, if ever you see orange dots in grasswood, they're marked to fell, sadly. I go around in June, July and August marking, ready for those to be felled this next winter. And basically we use a Forestry Commission guideline of anything with more than 50% dieback in the canopy is dying and has to come down, where it's within reach of a path. As I said, everywhere else we're leaving was dead standing timber. The rot patterns are really strange. You get some that are completely rotten just at the base, some that are completely rotten all the way up, some that have very strange patterns in them, as you can see here. And we have, volunteers have done a sterling job following a couple of us around with chainsaws, one of the volunteers with a chainsaw as well, and tidying up within reason. We are leaving quite a lot of dead timber on the ground as well, but we are making habitat piles and various things. We've also had a very good local company, low maintenance chainsaw trainers, are basically using specialist mechanical wedges here to fell a big ash tree that's dead. We can't knock traditional ash trees. This is how unstable they are. We can't knock traditional wedges in, behind the chainsaw blade anymore, because that can be enough to dislodge branches in the canopy. And we're finding that we're having to fell fairly sharpish, fell and get out of the way. As soon as that tree starts to go, you are getting out of the way. And it will come to a point where we will probably have to find another way of getting rid of these trees rather than just chainsawing, because they are becoming more unsafe each year. But yeah, very sad. On the plus side, we're opening up lots of new glades. We're finding new wildflowers appearing that haven't been in places before. We're getting more butterflies coming into the site, particularly from like Bastow Wood above us, which is a fantastic site for butterflies. So there are some positives. And I kind of hope, these were 2 ash trees I took photos of a couple of years ago, which I thought survived. Unfortunately, they've both died since. But there will potentially be some within the wood that are still alive and healthy. And if we are finding those, then we will get those seeds collected and then try and grow them on as part of a big project, national project, hopefully to replant at some stage in the future, but that will be years away yet. Yeah, just to say, we've had a lot of support for grasswood. It's a very important reserve to us. We get grants every year. We get donations every year from Wharfdale Naturalist Society. So we can buy very expensive bits of kit like what's called a tree popper on the left, which is used for pulling scrub out of the glade areas that we manage. We do have glade areas that we keep managed as glades. We've also got money for toenail nest boxes as well, and one of them's being used this year, which is nice. Those only went in last winter, so that's good. Those are going into use. So very active supporters group here. Our volunteers are superb around the place, but Grasswood Group is one of the best established groups we have in the county, and they do a fantastic job. They are a great support to our work. And we have volunteers doing practical tasks. We have volunteers doing bird surveys and butterfly surveys. And couldn't work without our volunteers. They're so important to us. And then COVID, we've talked about COVID. I think this is my last grasswood slide, but one of the strange benefits of COVID was that the sites were all quiet. And this is, if you look closely, right in the middle of the picture is a nesting toenail, and you can just about pick it out. And that had 2 young, and it was basically nesting right through lockdown last year, about 50 yards from a car park. So how it survived there, but it did, because I kept checking up on it. And we're fairly hopeful that 2 young got away and fledged and got away, but normal years that just wouldn't work. But now we've got the nest boxes for them anyway. But yeah, one of the few nice things about COVID was some of the sites became quite quiet havens for wildlife. Leyburn, last couple of slides. Leyburn Old Glebe is a spectacular site near Wensley, well worth a visit. has a couple of particular rarities. Burnt orchid on the left, which is struggling. Actually, we didn't have any there last year. We've had 2 in flower that we know of this year. Last year, we think it was the drought that did them, and we had a bit of an early drought this year. So we're hopeful it's hanging on in there, because again, we're working with the National Park and Kew Millennium Seed Bank to try and collect seed from these, to have them then grown on by Kew, and then eventually in a few years' time planted out at receptor sites where they have been historically, or where they would be suitable. And on the right is green winged orchids. We get a lot of those on site. There were hundreds of those, whereas we only had 2 burnt orchids on site this year. And there's some of those green winged orchids can be almost pure white as well. Fantastic site for spring flowers, and it's a site you can visit 2 weeks apart, and it's just stunning. Every time you go there is different. Again, tway blades on the left, and then a few bee orchids, not huge numbers. But again, a site that we manage in partnership with local farmer. We have a grazing license with, like we do on many of our sites. And this is one that he comes in. He cuts later here because we're trying to make sure the burnt orchids are seeded. So he'll cut August, September here, and then graze it lightly in the winter. We did try fencing off the burnt orchids to protect them from rabbits, but it kind of attracts attention to them, which can be a little bit tricky, because I'm a photographer, hand up, but we can get almost like a flat patch around it where photographers are lying down to get a good photo of it. So we need to just be a little careful. Rabbits are a problem on this site. We are going to re-rabbit proof it. We do have rabbit proof fences around, but we do have an issue at the moment with myxomatosis, which is very sad, but will reduce the numbers down. Don't know where it's coming from. And again, we restore the walls on the site, and we have a rare snail in that wall. This one is called Dahlia perversa, and I can't remember the guy's name. It's in my notes, so apologies if he's listening. A local expert on snails found it in the wall, and this snail is quite specific in its requirements. It likes dry stone walls, but not ones with cemented coping stones. There you go. So it likes traditional dry stone walls. Never seen one. I've only seen his photograph of them, but it's a very distinctive shell on it. So we do look out for it when we do walling repairs here. And again, we've done a very traditional skill. We've done a lot of hedge laying down one of the boundaries, and we're doing this over about 6 or 7 years. So we get a bit of a decent sort of variable age structure across, and we're leaving quite a few standard trees in as well. And we've done this with our volunteers and a group from Help for Heroes who came over from Catterick, who were, again, absolutely inspirational, some of their stories, and yeah, phenomenal the work they could do, considering that 1 or 2 of them didn't have any legs and things like that. So they were just superb people to work with. So yeah, a wonderful site. If you get a chance, I can thoroughly recommend going there as well. Oh, I said 2 sites. Sorry, I said 2 sites to go. I've got 2 sites to go now, I think. Sorry, or 3. I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to rattle through these. Water, we own quite a lot of land near Water itself, but we also own very wet pasture near Marset Meadows, near Marset, and we're just in the process of making this all stop proof so it can be grazed and managed as a wet meadow. The fencing contract should have finished on Friday, but not been to see because I've been off this week. We have massive problems here with flash floods. We've had five flash floods come through in the last 4 years, which have moved hundreds, and I mean hundreds of tons of stone. That gravel there on the right is over 2 to 3 feet thick and sort of 60, 70, 80 yards long. And it's basically just washing off the top of Fleet Moss. It comes down off peatland. I know you're obviously a campaigning organisation, very keen to support work on peatland conservation. And I believe Jenny Sharman, one of my office mates from Skipton, spoke to you recently. Well, Fleet Moss, Jenny is doing a phenomenal job on the conservation of that. This is what Fleet Moss looks like. You've probably already seen these pictures. That's the current, or was the current state of play before the start of the restoration work. All caused by moorland grips being put in these bigger channels and just washing away, and it causes huge floods downstream. It causes water quality issues, washes away the peat, so it's really bad from a carbon sink point of view. But now, all over Yorkshire now, you'll start to see this. The Yorkshire Peat Partnership I share an office with are doing phenomenal work restoring a lot of our peatlands. And this is basically enabling the sphagnum and cotton grasses to start growing again, the peat to start forming again, which in turn becomes a hugely important carbon sink, slows the water down, and also improves the water quality and water clarity as well. So yeah, watch this space on the peat work. It's fantastic work. And hopefully it'll help me down in Water and Marset as well. It'll help stop the flash floods. Weybeck's pasture, and the site probably none of you know, so I'm just going to go. It's a site probably none of you know, it's just near Kilnsey. It's one we've had in a 20-year farm business tenancy that's coming to an end. It's not in particularly good condition, but it does have some nice things like marsh hellebrine on site. The hay meadow isn't particularly good, but we're going to do some work on that when we change the grazing on there. It's currently overgrazed and has had some manure on that shouldn't have gone on, I don't think. Good site for butterflies, even tatty blue butterflies. You also got bog bean on the right, so there's a nice marshy area there, and dark green fritillaries, and again, really good site for orchids. Yeah, so watch this space on that one. It's probably my least well-managed site. It is a challenge because we need to change the grazing to suit the conservation aims of the site rather than necessarily the farming aims of the site. And we always have to strike that balance, and that's not always easy. Final site, this is definitely the final site. Yellands Meadow. This is one of the Muka Meadows, the famous Muka Meadows, part of the SSSI / Special Scientific Interest on many of my sites. A lovely traditional hay meadow again. We've got barn owls nesting in there this year. We think we might have bats roosting in there, Dole Benton's bats, because they've been seen on the river there hunting just in the last couple of weeks. And just a nice site again. It just shows what can happen when conservation and farming work hand in hand. You know, we do have this resource of traditional hay meadows. And it's so important that we keep those and expand them where we can. So what next? Well, I can't tell you about what next in many ways. We've got, all I can say is a week tomorrow, there's going to be an exciting announcement, and keep your eyes out on sort of the local press and probably on our website, on the Worldwide Fund for Nature website as well. If you want a bit of a sneak preview, just look at Wild Ingleborough on our website. But needless to say, it links in what I was saying before about wanting to expand some of our sites and improve some of the management and make some of our sites more joined up. Now, I can't tell you any more, and I really wish I could, but hopefully in a year's time, I'll be able to take you and show you the work on site. If we could arrange a site visit, I think that'd be absolutely fantastic. Right, my voice, I think, is about to go. So I think that's it from me. So thank you for listening. Hope some of you have got some enjoyment out of that. If you've got any questions that I can't answer now, which I'll try to, do find me an email, or do have a look at our Twitter account, or just get in contact with me, and I'll see what I can do. Right, I'm going to stop now before my voice goes.